All right, so today, welcome to the class. Today we are looking at chapter 1 of and I want to do this in the way that I normally, yes, Mr. Mohammed. See your hand up again. Rihan?
So I don't know what happened there, but I think it was low. It didn't lower from the last time.
It didn't what?
I don't think it lowered from the last time. I'm not sure because I didn't raise my hand again.
Oh, okay. No, I just came back up actually. All right, so if for those of you who might who are familiar, so I'm hoping this format here will allow me to kind of keep a view of what's happening in the classroom while at the same time tell me this looks big enough you guys can see what's happening with the
Yes.
PowerPoint. I want to keep the list of names in case people have questions. I'd see their hands come up and that kind of stuff, and I'll be able to respond to you as we expect. Okay. All right. So I'm dealing with the first presentation that is available on the e-classroom for you as well, the PowerPoint and whatnot. All right. So as we said before, this is a leadership and ethics course. It's designed as a introductory course, so therefore it's not meant to go into significant depth, although there is a great deal of breadth to the course that we're going to be looking at. The model that we're going to be looking at focuses on a very personal view of the whole process of leadership and how it works. And it's going to primarily utilize your self-assessment and self-evaluation. So a lot of this is reflections based. And from it, you're going to be dealing or developing your own personal leadership plans and assessments that you're moving forward with. We're going to look at, that was Nathan coming back in. We're going to be looking at the application of some of these theories so that a lot of the assignments are going to ask you to try to apply these things. So course objectives. So yes, we want to look at various theories. We want to apply and defend decisions of ethical decision making. That's going to be a big area that we want to look at. Create plans that apply to the concept of good governance. That has to do with your leadership plan. For those of you who were here last week, you would have met the assignments that are kind of linked to this. The one that I want to speak about a little more is the last one here, 6. Display and modify behaviors indicative of a personal philosophy of positive leadership and ethics. So, what do we have any sociology students here or psych students or anybody who did sociology and psychology or combination thereof? Nobody? All right. So what the question I want to ask is, what do you understand? Right. Okay. So what do you understand, Olivia, by behavior modification? What does that mean?
So to me, behavior modification would mean finding ways to curb or call certain characteristics or behaviors that we display.
All right.
So,
For
yeah.
example, give me an
Yeah.
example of that.
Well, in terms of leadership, I would imagine one behavior modification that someone would like to try would be in if you're speaking to people in a group, perhaps your tone. If you're displeased with something, you can modify your tone, and generally, you might think that if you're angry, you just shout, but you might
All
just
right.
Say the
Okay.
same words, but just modify the tone. So that's
Okay.
something.
So how do we go about modifying behaviors? Now, Olivia can't be the only person answering these questions. It's open to everybody. How do we generally go about modifying behaviors? Hi, Kelly. Welcome.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So I think at first we would have to study we behavior, we personal behavior before we could actually do any adjustments to it.
Okay, but have you ever experienced behavior modification exercises in your life? Yes, Chad.
So it sounds like you're talking about corporal punishment and
But
writing on the penance and
that-
things.
that is one technique that has been utilized. The association of certain behaviors with rewards as opposed to other behaviors which are punished. Yes? Sounds familiar? Some of you may have grown up in environments where that technique of behavior modification was utilized by your parents. How many of you all got punished as a child growing up? Olivia, you got punished? Oh, good Lord, look at people getting licks.
Yes, my father was very,
Strict,
I would say, arbitrary.
arbitrary. So he
Yes,
used to beat you.
everything was licks. He had no communication skills. It's like anger was just licks, everything licks. No,
So anything you did
conflict,
that, anything that
yeah,
you did that he didn't like,
anything.
wow.
And if he beats you, and then the next week he remember that you did that to him and he was displeased, you do it again. More licks.
My God, sounds like he
No,
suffers
no
from
conflict. What's
more
that?
consistent. It sounds like he was suffering from some form of some
Yeah,
psychological disorder.
yeah, I think so too.
Wow. Is he still around?
Yes.
Have you ever talked to him now that you're more of an adult about that behavior?
Not as yet.
Okay.
I think I kind of understand why he was the way that he was, so
Why is
I
that?
forgive him.
Why do you think he was the way he was?
Growing up, he had a hard life. He was abandoned. His mother left him and went to England and had another family. His father was an alcoholic. We used to come home and beat him, and he used to have to escape and all kind of thing. And I think as a young man, he had to find a group of men, I guess, to father him. And they taught him that, if you have to be a man, you have to hit and control and discipline, and
All
he
right.
just went down that path. Combine that with a little bit of religion, it was crazy.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
All right, Melinda, that was an interesting share. Melinda, I see a hand up. Do you want to share something?
No, I just put my hand up showing that I actually experienced behavior modification as well in my life, but it wasn't really to say as a child. I would say like when I now started to work.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I have a way about me. I like doing things on my own. I don't really ask for help and stuff. So I find myself doing everybody portion of work.
Right.
And then supervisors and managers had to perform roles. We can't see when we have a team here and everybody has to do their
Work
part.
together.
Yeah.
Right. So you had a different form of behavior modification. Hopefully that comes there. Now, which behaviors become more permanently ingrained in the individual? And just to kind of wrap this discussion up, the behaviors that stay with us longer, are those that come from an internal motivation, or what we call intrinsic motivation, and not from an external motivation. Because in the absence of that stimulus, there's a likelihood for us to return to that behavior if the stimulus that creates or modifies the behavior is no longer there. One would think that, you know, if you get enough punishment from somebody else, that the person would stop behaving in a particular manner. But the fact of the matter is that once that individual is no longer around and the chance of punishment is no longer available or possible, then there's a great likelihood that the behaviors that they were trying to change will disappear, and the person will naturally move back towards how they normally behaved in the first place. In terms of this course, we want to modify your behaviors, and the way in which we want to get this done is really through internal or intrinsic motivations. We want you to take into consideration or take on board the concepts and ideas that we're having and want to make these changes yourselves. So we're looking at developing in you internal motivational factors that will guide you towards wanting to make those changes moving across the board. All right. So that is a very lofty course objective, because it's highly unlikely that we will be able to see behavior modifications in probably everybody by the end of the course. But what I've always found is that a lot of the behavior modification comes later on, after the course and its content has had a chance to kind of distill itself into your brain and into your thinking processes. So as I said, in terms of a course objective, this is one that is pretty lofty. Hopefully you all will see it happening as you move along from it. All right, so we already talked about the textbooks that we spoke about that we're utilizing for the course. So these are the textbooks that we're looking at, and today we're going to be looking at Unit 1, or beginning the process of looking at Unit 1 of the Exploring Leadership text. So primarily, this unit is going to try to posit leadership in the current circumstance in the 21st century. And it's going to carry on the whole concept that leadership is a skill that can be developed by individuals, regardless of their walk of life or where they come from. And we need to bring to bear, because the nature of this text is US-based text, we need to bring to bear the Caribbean experience and our local experience when it comes to leadership and the development of leadership in our context, for the simple reason that we have to remember that eventually we all die, and therefore new leaders have to emerge. And one of the ideas is looking at what are the kinds of leaders that emerge based upon the sort of influences that shape them. So what you find happening, if we think of something like, do you all know I'm going to use some older leaders here in the Caribbean context. You all know Papa Doc and Baby Doc? You all ever heard of those two phrases about leaders from the Haitian island? Ever heard of them?
No, sir.
Yes,
Never
sir.
heard Papa Doc and Baby Doc? So those were two leaders. One was a father and one was a son, that were extremely brutal in Haiti. They were what we call maximum leaders. So they ran almost like dictatorships, and they really took advantage of the population. Now, Baby Duck and Papa Duck didn't emerge overnight. They emerged in the context of the environments that they found themselves being operating in. So that dictatorial or dictated style of leadership wasn't something that they learned by themselves or was just born with it. They developed that based upon the examples of things that they faced in the past before. So one of the things we have to look at is what is the environment and what's the history of leadership in our own environments. And if we look back at that, we'll have a tendency to be able to see the type of leadership that is likely to emerge in the Caribbean context that we start to look at. All right. Though obviously change takes place, it does not necessarily take place quickly nor with any form of certainty. And that's because historically we have in the Caribbean, we have had a history of what we call very strong maximum style leaders in that take charge of our country politically and that type of stuff. So there's that example of leadership that, you know, whatever the leader says must go, and there's very limited discussion and debate. And that style of leadership, a lot of the younger generation now can't manage that style. In fact, they can't tolerate that style of leadership, because if something doesn't make sense, then you know you're not going to get somebody to follow you because they don't see it as making sense to them. And that is something that we have to pay attention to. How do we, if we have a good idea, how do we bring that idea across to everybody to be able to follow along in that circumstance? All right. So that's part of where this book is going to look at, and hopefully we'll start to understand things from that perspective. So the text starts by defining leadership as a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. So the main takeout of this is that leadership is primarily about the relationship that we develop with people around us as we work together to do things. Now, the focus here on the ethical approach is to ensure that we are doing good things, positive things. The problem is good and bad are relative concepts. So we have to be careful when we look at that, because what is good for one set of individuals may be viewed as being bad for another set. And we're going to be looking at the ethical decision-making models to go along with this, which is why the marriage of leadership and ethics is an important element, because a lot of the past leadership that we looked at. Somebody has a question. Somebody's mic came up. A lot of the questions that came up in the past about leadership was in fact bring up this was of questionable ethical benefits to individuals. So that's why the model that we're going to be looking at marries very closely leadership practices and ethical practices moving together, because a lot of times people in leadership positions seem to you know not follow leadership. All right, so let's look at how leadership is viewed. And the first frame of reference that we can utilize is to look at leadership from political sciences. And when we look at politics, what we're looking at in terms of leadership is about how people arrive in positions of power and how they use that power to influence others. So when we think of politics, we think about about this. This is what the genesis or the whole situation of political leadership is all about. It's about getting into positions of power and using that power to influence decisions to suit somebody's needs and wants. So when we think of that, if we think of these three individuals here as being leaders in positions of a lot of influence. Now, technically, so you all recognize these individuals, right? Well, there are flags there, so it should help
Yes, sir.
with that.
Yes, sir.
All right. So right now, I mean, Russia is in a situation where they have a war going on, and the United States has problems with Russia, and they also seem to be having problems with China as well when it comes to the economic activity. So these three people currently have a lot of interaction with each other because their views of how the world should be does not necessarily meet their countries, the countries that they represent, their countries' popular points of view. So obviously that leads to conflict, and world conflict is a serious issue that we have to face. So recently this finished, the G20 summit in New Delhi, India, and these individuals were there along with two others, because this is only 18 of the 20. The persons missing here are the representatives for the EU and the United States. The others, I found it very funny that that those photos were there. I don't think they attended that meeting. Now, can anybody tell me what is the G20 about? And there are other G summits as well. Anybody can explain what the G20 is about? It used to be the G10 before, G7, G8.
So it's a meeting with the leading 20.
I guess those are the countries with the highest
Good.
economic.
Yeah. Turkey, really? Okay. So yes, the purpose of this organization is to bring together leaders from the largest economies in the world to try and set some strategies together so that there would be less conflict between the countries in relation to trying to set up their particular well, generally what they do, that when they meet, there's certain areas that fall into the summit activities. So they will have activities in relation to in particular this time around, I think they were looking at climate change issues and activities to try and reduce the usage of fossil fuels and to reduce pollution and that type of stuff. And some countries have more to do than others. So for instance, India and China, for example, are some of the most polluted nations in the world. So therefore it puts a lot of pressure on their economies to try and fix those things. Whereas the United States and the UK and Russia, they are the largest consumers of world's resources, and therefore they put their own pressures on the system. So again, the idea about these meetings is to try to get together to avoid future conflicts in the world. And that's an important thing, because as each country is looking to move its own agendas forward, it is important that they find some degree of alignment with international standards, or else there's likely to be a situation where we run into problems and conflict arises. And with that conflict comes the real possibility of war and that type of breakdown, which is what these types of summits are all about. The UN is also one of those other organizations that you would see members going there. And therefore, the situation is that a lot of the countries have limited power, and their power is really determined by the strength and importance of their economies. For those of you who might be paying attention to the BRICS, anybody here understands when I say BRICS what I mean?
Yes, so the new currency.
Well, the new international currency utilized by the BRICS, which is, anybody knows Brazil? BR. R is, anybody? Russia, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They make up the countries called the BRICS. They were the fastest, at the time when they were formed, they were the fastest growing economies in the world. And they were engaging in a lot of trade. And one of the objectives that they had was to stop trading with each other in US currency. So therefore they pulled together to decide to create their own currency, which does not suit, and this is the problem here, it does not suit the interests of the EU, and it does not suit the interests of the United States. So therefore, they're going to have a fair amount of problems when it comes up, because they're going to get into direct conflict with those countries as a result of trying to do what they would like to do, because the US will see it as a direct threat to their economic sovereign. That's an interesting situation that you're going to find coming up there. All right, so we understand now in terms of this particular view of leadership, here we're talking about power and influence. Another framework is from the framework of running a business. Management. Management looks at the effectiveness of outcomes or supervisor-subordinate relationships. So basically, when we talk about leadership from the management perspective, we're looking at getting the most out of the people that we have working for us. So whenever you start to read about leadership in the management context, it's about outcomes orientation. So it's about profits, it's about getting the most amount of sales, turnover, and so on. So those are the kind of things. And therefore, when we look at leaders that are seen as being leaders in business, these leaders are measured as being successful based upon the amount of money that they make. So you can see a whole host here of different business people. Some of you may recognize some of them, hopefully. And the measurement of success here is the amount of money that they made in their businesses that they operate, their management structures and styles. That makes sense? You can follow this one here in terms of management and how that looks at becoming a leader. Means you get to this position because you've proven yourself as a successful manager within the area of business that you're looking at, and you've made a lot of money and a lot of profit. All right, it has to do with the accumulation of wealth. So that's something that what you want to look at there. All right, anthropology is another frame of reference that is utilized, but this one looks at leadership from more of a retrograde view. It looks at the culture of societies, its language, the tools that it's developed, and the symbols that arose in their lives, and they work out or try to look at how leadership emerged in those societies. When we talk about anthropology, we tend to think about more, what's the word, older civilizations, but you can also have anthropological studies taking place of current societies. What, for example, would be something that we can symbolize our current society? If there was anything that what key tool would we see as being part of the anthropological, let's say if 200 years from now, they're looking back at our time and they are examining our culture, influences, language, and tools and such, what do you think they would find? They'd find these. Not so? They'd find smartphones as one of the major tools that we utilize it as part of our tool set to develop our leadership and that type of stuff. So if you understand what I'm talking about here, from the anthropological thing, when we study societies, we look at the culture that develops, the things that we do. So now we're in this place of kind of like work from home situations and online environments. So you're gonna find that a lot of physical structures don't exist anymore in terms of because the online environment or the virtual environments are becoming more critical. The linguistics, the language that we develop not only from the use of the words, but also the way in which we, as one person pointed, the way in which we talk and the way in which we develop our slangs. Those things become important for us to look at. And of course, archaeology will help us to uncover evidence of those things from the past. Anybody here ever was ever curious about how people lived and did things in the past? I mean, like my conspiracy theory guy, who's at Cato. That's part of the conspiracy theories look at evidence from the past, and they start to say things like or they theorize that a lot of the things we think was developed by cultures from the past was actually developed by alien cultures that came here and did the work for us. So such as things like the building of the pyramids and such major structures. They don't think that the population that existed then and the technology that existed then didn't allow for that degree of accuracy in terms of how things were done. So I don't know if any of you all are familiar with that.
Yes,
Keto,
sir.
yeah?
Mhm.
Keto, you're the one I'm looking at with that. Is he here still?
Yes, sir. Yeah, no?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
I don't believe in aliens.
You don't believe in any of that?
I don't think he that deep down the rabbit hole yet. He probably like surface level. Sorry, but I real into that, and I think when we look at like the level of knowledge they had in terms of astronomy, the things that they knew, the planets that they knew was in our solar system before we even discovered it. It's like, how the hell did they know that?
Yeah, yeah.
And if you look at just the construction, like the level of construction and the things they were able to build and the precise way they could put stones together without even like a seam, or you couldn't even break them apart. It's crazy, and we cannot do it now. It's like, come on.
It takes a lot of effort to do things like that now. And more importantly, one of the things that they look at was how they position these, like the Great Pyramid of Giza, those pyramids. They are perfectly aligned with the Earth in terms of
Yes.
their direction and stuff like that. How did that
Yes.
take place without
Yes.
being aware of certain things? That was, how you draw a line around the world and make sure it's straight.
It's literally the center. It's like, how did they explain it? It's like it's in the center of our landmass then, is basically, and it points to Orion, this constellation of Orion. If you look
Right, yes.
all right, it's a lot.
Yep.
That wasn't just a pyramid that somebody just decided to build right there. This thing is too intricate.
Precise.
Like the calculations, the number of stones equate literally to like the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Is like, oh, all kind of things in that, just a little bit of
History.
not a little bit.
A lot of construction there. Right, but we
Yeah.
understand that. We get that. All right, so moving along, another way in which we look at or we look at leadership is we look at leadership from a historical point of view. And whenever we look at it from that particular position, what we try to look at are those individuals in the past who have had some sort of significant effect on our societies as they got involved in social movements in the past. So from a historical point of view, because history is always something that we spend time looking at, one of the reasons why we do that is because we look at the example of the leadership coming from that period. So how many of you all recognize these individuals, historically speaking?
Yeah, Hitler.
Yes, sir.
Right, so that's Hitler. Chad, what you seeing? And
Yeah,
Denise,
the front line.
the front line. All right, so each one of these individuals here are leaders of countries that were key participants in the last World War II. So Hitler, obviously from Germany. This is Joseph Stalin from Russia. This is Winston Churchill from Great Britain, and this is Roosevelt from the United States. And the four of them, along with other leaders from other countries, were very pulled together to set up what we called allies. They became allies to defeat Hitler. And unfortunately, they also created the circumstances under which Russia emerged after the World War II in the Cold War scenario that took place and led to the division of the Soviet Union from the Western world, and that separation that we still have today with Russia and the Western world. That origin of that story comes from this period, and that's part of the thing, because decisions made by leadership in the past have long shadows over how things go in this current time frame. That makes sense? All right, so let's look at this guy. Everybody knows him from a historical point of view.
Yes,
Yes?
sir.
All right, who's that, Villalba?
That is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Right, and what movement is he involved in this particular image?
I know he was a black freedom fighter. I don't know which exact thing.
Civil rights.
Anybody knows what movement he was involved in?
Civil rights.
The civil rights movement in the United States in the 50s into the 60s. All right. This was another gentleman who was involved in the civil rights movement. Everybody knows him?
Yeah, I think he was a Trinidadian born in Port of Spain, but he known for being a Pan-Africanist in America.
Right, but what's his name?
Carmichael, but he changed it later and he like Kwame Ture.
Right, good. Somebody who knows. He was a Trinidadian who went to school in the United States and became part of the Black Power movement there, and then returned to Trinidad and kind of led that movement here. He was actually involved in the Black Power movement here in Trinidad and the 1970 revolution that took place as well. If you ever want to see an interesting take on his life and contribution, you could look at a film called The Black Klansman, where Kwame Ture was featured in that thing. Anybody familiar with that film, The Black Klansman? No?
No,
I
sir.
heard about it, but I never watched it before.
You should look at it. It actually featured Kwame Ture was the guy who they were planning the assassination for, and it's a true story. It's based on a true story. So the Black Klansman turned out to be this black guy who was able to join the Ku Klux Klan and infiltrate them. So he had to get a white police officer or agent or something like that to go and play him from that perspective. And it was funny, but at the same time, it spoke volumes as to the nature of what was taking place then. All right. So historically, these guys had a very important these are other individuals who, from a historical point of view, influenced some aspect of life in the world around us. So there's a whole host of them here that you may be able to identify and recognize. And those people should be able to, we have a couple of individuals that stick out here. Kelly, you would see Castro here. Should
Yes,
be.
sir. I don't like him.
You don't like him?
No,
Why not?
because he's a dictator. Actually, right now in Cuba still dictatorship. I don't know. Because of him, his brother, they basically ruined the country. But people outside Cuba don't know. Only we know. It's complicated.
That's
More
interesting.
complicated situation.
Yeah, a lot of people who are from a Western perspective look at the system that Castro developed to be very negative. But if you are in the country, I mean, you really get to see the impact of that socialism there. But there's a whole host of different things. Everybody knows these four guys here? Or this guy with the mouse? You all familiar with those guys? Or this
Yes,
young...
sir.
Yeah? Who are they?
Is your the most Walt Disney?
Yes. Influential in animation and the development of the whole Disney empire and Disney films and such, which we still have today. The four guys are the Beatles next to Elvis here. These guys are influential in terms of the nature of music, and popular music today owes a lot to what they did in the past. Marilyn Monroe here in the corner is also, she's an actress that influenced the nature of how Hollywood developed moving forward from the 50s into the 60s, 70s, and even today. They still reference her in terms of being sort of like the baseline for beauty and that type of stuff. We'll meet more of them as we move forward through the course and make reference. One that we should probably pay attention to a little more is this gentleman in the middle here. This guy here, anybody knows him? Nelson Mandela. Important gentleman who was critical in the end of apartheid in South Africa, which now leads South Africa to be one of the strongest growing economies in the world. So interesting things there. All right, lots of people who have had influence on where we got to in the future today. Somebody just came in there. I wanted to take note of that. Fian, welcome back. Let me just make sure you. Yes, Linton. Is there anybody else who came in late and didn't let me know? Seeing 22 of you here, but I only have 21 present. All right. Okay, so moving back to our. Okay, so another framework is through the lens of psychology and sociology. Of course, we have a couple of people there. From those individuals, any of you all recognize these gentlemen here? No, Well, Sigmund Freud here,
Karl Marx.
Karl Marx, and all right, this guy may not be easy to tell. This is B.F. Skinner. And the reason why these three guys are listed here, Karl Marx was a sociologist. Freud is a psychiatrist. Well, he's involved in the development of psychiatry. And B.F. Goodrich is one of those gentlemen who got involved in education. And he was one of those guys who developed a lot of theories in and around education, in particular adult education, that had a great impact upon the development of leadership studies, because each of these fields contributed to the development of leadership studies, and some of the different leadership theories that emerged out of the combination of those sciences or social sciences would be all these that we will be looking at in the not too distant future. All right, probably next chapter, I guess. All right, so the question that I want to ask at this point in time is, how does your field of study approach leadership? Now, obviously, if you're in a management circumstance, if you're dealing with the studies in management, then we understand that leadership in the management field looks at outcome and how to get the best output from given the nature of what's taking place. But what about some of the other fields? I know this boy was here earlier. Is it Mr. Mohammed? You're doing what program again?
Radiography.
Right. So how does leadership work there?
In terms of
how do people arrive in positions of leadership?
So basically, it's with seniority, and I think some of the like to actually become like head departments have certain exams and stuff to reach to that post.
Right.
It's really
so
like,
it's a combination of
experience and
qualifications. Yes.
That's correct.
Right. Are there any other fields here?
I do graphic design.
Right. Okay. So how do people emerge into leadership positions in graphic design?
Well, for me personally, I think a lot of designers do like freelance stuff or have their own businesses. So you need to know how to carry the business forward, since it's just it's like a solo thing.
Okay. So that means that their leadership is based upon arriving in a leadership position requires some degree of success in the sense of profitability.
Yeah.
So it merges creativity with management acumen. Now, that is not necessarily going to be easy skills to get from both. So a lot of graphic companies, they divide themselves into 2 or 3 different divisions: the creative division and the administrative division, if you're running a business. Because successfully creative campaign, for example, still has to be administered by somebody who understands how to run a business. And the expectation of the graphic artist or the artist being able to do that is possibly going to be a misnomer. Not because you're a good artist does it make you a good manager. And that's something that we have a problem here, especially people who are in business for themselves. So for those of you who decide, you want to set up your own business and stuff like that, you might be skilled at a particular type of activity, but it does not necessarily make you skilled at managing the business activities itself. So one of the strengths of entrepreneurship is to recognize your limitations. I saw somebody's hand go up and then back down. All right, Olivia, go ahead. Ms. Lodrick?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just As you mentioned that, I just wanted to say that that's something that I struggle with because I have a small business, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to do this course. I struggle with coming across as, I guess, a dictator because I did not know the importance of. It's very hard to run a team or to work with others when you're accustomed doing everything yourself, but then you realize you can't.
Well,
And then
yeah.
you expect everybody to be as focused and as timely as you, and they are not. So I really hope you could give me some tips.
All right, so you're struggling with that. All right, that's cool. All right, interesting. What chapter did you have to present?
So understanding
Self?
yourself, yes.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, we'll see. There's a group that's presenting working in teams and groups, but that's something that we're going to be paying attention to. All right, so the framework that we are going to utilize in this course is the framework of the relational leadership model. And in the future, we'll start to refer to it as the RLM model, relational leadership model. Again, in the framework, we're talking about the nature of relationships between the leader and the subordinates or followers in the organization to be able to achieve a particular thing. And it's going to focus or pull upon a lot of these psychological and educational frameworks that develop the concepts and ideas. And it's going to require that, one, we learn a lot about yourself, who you are, why you are the way you are. Self-awareness in the context of others. This is understanding others and why other people treat you the way you are. So there's understanding who you are and being aware of how other people see you. Those are very different things, but also very important to deal with. Understanding your own personal values and ethical systems. We need to understand that to be able to get this relational project. So the development of this leadership model requires self-awareness, effective listening, collaboration, compromise, and it requires practice. So most of these things are fairly straightforward. Self-awareness is fairly straightforward. Effective listening. How do you go about effectively listening to people, to others? Don't let Olivia be the only person who's answering questions here. So, Ms. Suku, how Ariana, how do you go about listening effectively to other people? Ms. Sedano, maybe? One of these people are actually there, or the computers are just on.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, Sedano. How do you go about effectively listening to somebody?
I guess I'm not interested in what I'm saying.
Okay. Are there any mass comm students here?
Yes, sir.
Right. Who that? Melinda. Okay, Melinda. So what are the main requirements for effective listening?
Eye contact.
Uh-huh.
You don't necessarily have to answer like give response like yeah, okay, all of that. Eye contact, and also nod now and again to show that you understand what they're saying.
Uh-huh.
Right? Yeah, make sure you have no distractions around you when you're actually listening to a person, like cell phones or wherever the case may be.
Right. Distractions.
Yeah, right, to show sincerity.
Uh-huh. And one
Well,
key thing.
asking questions for clarification on what you hear?
Yeah, those are the practices, but there's something that you have to do internally.
So staying open-minded.
Right. What does that mean? Staying open-minded.
Possibly, okay, so let me use the debate that I'm going to put in to do in the near future, where obviously two teams would have opposing sides to each other, but
right.
at a certain point, the opposing side would obviously, they would be listening, but they would lock off their hearing because like they don't believe the other person's point is valid because they think their point is so correct. So they don't bother to listen, but they still listening. It's just not effective listening.
Right. Okay, somebody's trying to get it. All right. So that is the behavior you're talking about there. Yes, Ariana was asking questions. All right. So the behavior I'm talking about there is something called suspending your personal judgment. So in order to effectively listen to somebody else, you need to suspend or to prevent yourself from judging that individual or judging the situation before they even start telling you anything. And that happens all the time. We judge people not based upon what they say and how they say it, but what they're talking about. So if you don't agree with or you have an aversion to what they're speaking to you about, immediately you stop listening. And for a leader, in order well, I can't only say for leaders, but for everybody, in order to be able to effectively listening to somebody, you have to suspend your judgment of the individual and what they're talking about with you. Because if you can't effectively listen without judging somebody, you'll fail at collaboration. Collaboration is mean effectively working with other people to achieve a goal. And compromising will be something that you'll have a lot of problems with because you're unable to give up your position and say to that other individual, hey, I value what you are coming to the circumstance or to the situation with. Compromise means giving somebody else the chance to do something by giving them value for what they're saying. So the approach that somebody else is coming with, though you may not agree with it or you're unaware of it, you're still going to say, okay, I'm going to compromise and say we'll do it your way. And you don't do it half-heartedly, right? You don't do it your way and we go see what happens. We can't take that type of attitude. We have to say we'll do it your way and work it through. That's the whole concept that you want to do. So in order for you to develop better leadership potential, these are some of the things that we're going to have to go through. And once we start doing this, we have to constantly keep on putting them into practice as part of our activities that goes on. So some principles behind leadership. One, leadership concerns us all. Why does it concern us all? It concerns us all because what leaders decide and what they do affects our lives, even as a child. Yes, Olivia.
So I wanted to ask, because you mentioned earlier in the previous slide that a very important part of effective listening is suspended personal judgment. I wanted to say that's something that's very easy to do in a quiet, calm, rational situation. But how do you suspend personal judgment? For example, if you come to someone with something that they did and you hear their response and you know in your heart is complete mess.
Well, you see, you're judging it already, and that's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
You can't
exactly. So
right. So you have to suspend your judgment of things, regardless of how you feel about it. So you might feel that the position the person is taking is absolute rubbish.
Right.
right? That's the point that you're coming with.
Right.
That is the time you have to practice effective listening the most.
Jeez. How do you even remember to do that though in the heat of the
Well,
moment?
that's why it has to become a practiced behavior. That's why it has to be practiced. It's not easy to do. If it were easy to do, everybody could do it.
So
You
then I
follow
need
the
to count to 10 or something.
Well, there are different techniques you could utilize for that. Counting to 10 really is about controlling your anger. Effective listening, which means suspending your frame of reference, means being more gentle with your approach to people. You
Okay.
understand? As I think it was Nicholas that indicated, you have to what was the phrase you used, Nicholas?
Open-minded.
Yes, you have to be more open-minded than
Yes, sir.
than the closed mind that you might have.
So sometimes you could say those things, yeah, be open-minded, but when you're in the heat of the moment and
Yeah, but
fire on,
yes.
what practical,
No,
it's
you
easy.
see, that's what I'm trying to say. It is
Yeah.
it is in the heat of the moment that you
Yes.
have to force yourself to put these skills in effect. That's the point that the model is saying. The model is not saying this is an easy thing, The model is saying that this is what we need to do. And in order to effectively do it, we have to constantly practice these habits in order to become better leaders. Because on a regular basis, you're going to come across people coming to you with ideas, concepts, or positions and thinking that you would find absolutely annoying, irritating, and abhorrent. All right. So, one that always comes to mind when we're talking about this is this whole debate about gender fluidity. Now, let me ask Olivia, how do you feel about gender fluidity? I heard the annoyance already. How many genders exist?
Two.
Right. So we have plenty of people coming in on this. But the whole point that I'm making to you is that if somebody comes up to you and begins to ask you or wants to speak to you because they're looking for some, just a listening ear, and you already start to lock off because they're coming to you and they see themselves as a transgendered individual, and it might be a woman or a man who feels that they're male or female, and you have that attitude where it only have one and two and nothing else exists, it's how I had a friend, is Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and that kind of thing, those kind of attitudes make us lock off, and therefore we stop listening to anybody when it comes to that.
So
Yes,
what?
Olivia.
If a stranger walks up to me and starts to ask me these questions and go on to say that their pronouns are they, them, and all of these crazy things. Surprisingly, I could suspend my personal judgment for them.
And I'm glad you're bringing this up, Olivia, because it is not with people you don't know that effective listening is hard. It's with people you love.
Correct.
Those people we have the closest relationships with.
Yes.
Are the ones in which we supposed to be more effective in listening to, but are the persons who we practice the worst behaviors with, because they hurt us or they have the potential to hurt us, and we them.
Yes, sir.
Think about it from that perspective. It means that when you're conversing and speaking to your parents, your siblings, your husband, your wife, you ought to bring to bear that, but because we have invested emotions in the relationship or in the well, and the whole thing about it, because we have an emotional connection, that emotional connection brings up another set of barriers because we stop listening because our emotions are running amok and we can't listen anymore because we are reacting to what the person has to say on an emotional level. Either we get upset and we get angry and we lash out. Those are the
So what
types of
should we like table the conversation and come back to it, or how do
there
you?
are a host of strategies that you can utilize. And those are things like the counting to 1 to 10 kind of situation is to give you time to try and normalize. Walking away and coming back to a conversation is another one. Writing about it so that the issue really is letting the person address you without you interfering with what they say. So sometimes couples any of you all here ever did couples therapy? No, maybe. No. All right. So in couples therapy, there's a technique that they utilize in terms of journaling. So you write something and you share it with your partner. And the idea is that they would try to read what you say without interrupting. Because that's partly what happens all the time. From the time a partner starts to speak, you get upset and you start to react, and therefore they don't get to finish what they have to say. And that has a tendency to be it makes the person who gets cut off feel less valued and cheated from the whole process or in the process. So in order to even the playing field, what they speak about or what techniques that they talk about is writing it out and sharing it. But I mean, that's not necessarily practical when you have to make a lot of fast decisions or something is urgent. And again, Olivia and others, effective listening is a difficult skill to get because it requires practicing. The younger and more I found that it doesn't matter, age has no bearing on this. Because we get fixed in habits very quickly, and breaking habits, again, behavior modification is difficult if there is no internal stimulus to want to do something. Understand? So what we're talking about here is not no easy stuff. All right. Okay, so coming back to the foundation principles that impinge upon the ability of us doing those things before, is that we have to realize that leadership is something that is of concern to all of us, and therefore it's something we should be paying attention to. If you think about children, the behaviors of their parents or their guardians impacts the lives of children very quickly. If they make mistakes in their decision making, it impacts the children very fast. The same thing applies in the society around us. If our leaders do nonsense, the people who are in the lower ends of society, they suffer very quickly as well. We have to appreciate that leadership is viewed and valued differently by people. So younger people have a tendency to dismiss leaders, especially leaders in a more seniority position, and therefore they will value it less, and they look upon their friendships and their colleagues as being more important. Whereas older individuals might look at leadership as being more important, and therefore that variation in views of how leadership is looked upon is something that we have to accept and understand, that everybody sees it differently. Leadership is not a static thing. It has to be flexible. So it means it has to be constantly evolving and changing and adapting to the circumstances that it faces. Therefore, different settings call for different types of leadership. So yes, Olivia, sometimes as a leader, you might have to use a more authoritative method of getting your point across or imposing your leadership decisions given a circumstance or given a situation. So different settings call for different types, and it doesn't mean that you can't use that that authoritative side. And of course, the main thing is that leadership as a principle and as a practice can be learned and it can be developed. Those are things that are important to us. Now, to be able to develop those things, we also need to recognize that we require commitment to high ethical standards. If you are in a position of leadership or you end up in positions of leadership, you have to remember that your behavior speaks to what's inside. You know what they say, what you are what you think. Not that you are what you eat. All right. So leaders need to commit to the highest possible ethical standards to be able to encourage others to want to take on and share that responsibility with you, to encourage change and social responsibility. You can't have a leader whose ethical values are questionable, who will successfully encourage others to do something. It don't work so. Leaders also have to encourage both in themselves and the people around them critical thinking, credibility, authenticity, integrity, and high ethical or good ethical conduct. These are the requirements for leadership. Most schools try to get us to think critically. Our credibility and authenticity, that's about truthfulness and honesty. Those things impact upon the integrity of an individual in terms of how people look at you as a person of integrity. And all of that comes from the ethical underpinnings of your life. Those are things that are required for you to become good leaders. Now, there are three basic principles for the development of this process. The knowing, which means we start off, you have to understand who you are. You must know yourself. You must understand how change occurs, both in yourself and others, and how and why others view things differently than you. Now, I think, Olivia, you gave us a really good example of understanding others in terms of when you were talking about your father and understanding why he behaved the way he did after the fact. But I know at the time that you were probably getting punished or earlier in your life, it wasn't something that you were trying to understand. You probably just wanted to, you hope things would have changed. But there was nothing you could have done.
At the time, I didn't understand it. I just knew that he was. But funnily enough, I was aware enough to know that he was just ridiculous. And it was ridiculous.
Where was your mom during this situation?
That's the next thing. His relationship with my mom was just as crazy.
I would imagine so because he would have had serious issues of abandonment and stuff like that, trust issues.
So his leadership basically was the issue. He was too authoritarian with
because he my dad. In fact, a lot of parents coming out of that period would have had similar types of behavior patterns. So something, but what I said, what I'm saying to you is that you have exhibited the ability to be able to analyze and critically think about why somebody behaves the way they are through the example that you talked about there. So look at this picture, all of you. What you see?
A skull.
Huh? Anybody else sees anything else?
A girl sitting down in front of a mirror, looking like that stuff funny table.
Anybody else seen that?
Yeah, so the latter.
Yes, I have. Yes.
You see the skull too?
No, the lady in the mirror.
In the boat.
You have to see, well,
I
again,
see both, so don't worry.
right. So that's what I was trying to say. This is one of these images that we utilize to indicate to people that when we look at something, it's not always what it might appear to be. All right. It's another example. What do you all see here?
So this one I don't understand because you say it had two pictures. Say with well, the young lady that turning, she watching around wherever, and then somebody is bending down, watching downwards or something like that. I don't seen that one.
So which one do you see?
The young lady watching over, she should.
Anybody sees the old lady looking down?
No, I'm not seeing that.
No.
Yes.
Oh.
All right. So the neck. Okay, I wouldn't sell it. I wouldn't sell it though. I see it. Oh gosh. A witch.
Are
She looking
are
like a
you
witch.
also seeing the young lady looking over her shoulder?
Yes.
So you're seeing both, right? Good. Okay, so Nicholas, was it you who couldn't see the old lady looking down?
I still can't see.
You still not seeing it? All right,
No.
so close your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Now open it and follow me. Now,
right.
I am taking my mouse and I'm saying to you, see this?
Yeah.
Is the nose. This and this are the eyes and eyelashes. This is the front of her hair poking out under this headdress. This is her mouth. And this is her chin. She's looking down. And this is like a coat that she's looking down into.
So
Seeing
I
it
now
there?
see it. I just
Yeah.
got it.
See, this is the chin, her mouth. This is her nose. This is one of her eyes here, and the other eyelash you can see here, which is the nose
Oh,
of
I
the.
don't think that.
Right, seeing it there, and this thing that flipping up in the air is like a headdress kind of thing, a style like a feather sticking up in the air kind of thing. In both instances, you seeing it now?
Yes, sir.
Right, finally. And you've been looking at this how long?
Since last week, Tuesday.
Good. All right. So you see
I
it
was
now?
watching the slides where you put the YouTube video number.
Yes, I remember. Okay, so you looked at it. Good, cool. But we understand what this is telling us is that when we look at something, there's possibly more than one way to look at it. That's the issue. And as leaders and as people who participate in groups, even not as a leader but as a follower, we have to appreciate that there is more than one perception that exists there. I think this is the best one here. Based upon where you are in a circumstance or situation, you will see things one way and another person will see it another way. So this whole argument that the two of them have in here about 6 and 9 is really a matter of what? Perception issues, right?
Yeah.
And the perception is based upon where they are. And this is one of the things that they always talk about in terms of trying to understand somebody else. We have to look at it from their perception and see what they're seeing. So this is a really good example of that. Now it's a simplistic version here in terms of the characterization and the cartoon that they did here, but it's bringing to bear the concept or the whole idea that we need to pay attention to why people, not only why, but how people arrive at their view. And Olivia's story about trying to understand the background of where her father came from and how he was treated by people. That's an important element to take into consideration when you're trying to think about other people and how they have arrived at the behaviors that they do. I've always found that one of the things that you don't have to agree with somebody, but you need to understand why they behave the way they do or why they think the way they do. You don't have to agree with somebody, but you need to try to understand why they behave or why they think the way they do.
Yeah.
All right.
And so when you I just wanted to say this, but when you get their perception or see where they come from, a lot of the anger and hurt just kind of dissolve away, you know.
Correct. It's
Because
quite
you
true.
start to realize that if you was in their shoes, you would probably do the same.
Correct. And that kind of eases the burden of having to want to make them feel the way you want them
Yeah,
to make them feel. So
yeah.
now you can accept, all right, this is the way they always. And I went through a similar process with my father, thinking about things from that perspective as well. And my mom too, same thing. I go through those things with my siblings and significant people in my life. If you don't spend some time and understand their backgrounds and where they come from, then you know it it makes your life difficult if you expect everybody to think like you. And that's a fallacy that we need to get around. Now we said the first part was the knowing. The second part now is the being. So yes, we need to know, but the second part is we need to be. If we say we want to be ethical, then we have to be ethical. If we want to be principled, we have to be principled. If we say we need to be open and caring and inclusive, then we need to be that way, regardless of the circumstances we find ourselves in. Now, this brings us back to a certain circumstance. We already spoke about this transgendered issue, and some people already indicated that they have challenges with it. I'm not saying anything's wrong with you having a challenge with somebody who has a gender crisis or gender issue, or see themselves as a female in a male body. Okay? If you are confronted by people in an organization which you lead who have those types of thinking and bearing, can you be open, caring, and inclusive to that individual? Now, I'm not asking for an answer. I'm saying to you, it is those circumstances that you have to bring into your practice, being open, caring, and inclusive. Not to people who are similar to you, but those people who are absolutely dissimilar and they vocalize something that is absolutely different to your own point of view. That is where the situation becomes most critical. I know some I have some friends, they're so anybody who's effeminate, any guy who's effeminate, they have a serious problem with all the time. They want to hit them and beat them, and that's the kind of behaviors that we talk about as being dangerous, because as a leader, if you show bias like that, you encourage other people to do the same thing. And it's the same thing that happened during World War II. The Nazis thinking about the Jewish issue, and Jews were responsible for all the ills in society, was a behavioral pattern that was shared among the leadership and the followership. They all had that same attitude towards the same issue, and therefore it was a principle that was copied by everybody in the army, and therefore the whole place went into ruin that way. So if you think about it from that perspective, and it wasn't only Jews as well, gays, gypsies, anybody who was colored, anybody who was disabled, mentally or physically disabled, they were all painted with that broad brush. As long as you were different, you weren't good, and you were sent to these concentration camps and killed. That's the danger of the being element. If you are ethical and principled, then it's across the board. You can't just be selective in how you be. That makes sense? Now, this is a quotation here, being the caring leader, from this gentleman here, Richard Branson, who owns and ran Virgin Records and Virgin Airlines. Having a personality of caring about people is important. You can't be a good leader unless you generally like people. That is how you bring out the best of them. Now, how many of you all ever came across a teacher that you had in your lifetime who didn't really like you? And how did you, how was that class for you? Have you ever come across a circumstance like that? Yes, Olivia. Just laughing is not going to be Nicholas.
Yeah, yes, I feel like I had circumstances where that, but in terms of like the teacher not wanting
Liking
to
you.
really, yeah, really teach me, or like it had situations where asking teacher for help wasn't really an option, I guess. And
Yeah,
it
because
made the class a lot more difficult, and I feel a lot more unproductive.
not only that, you'd probably feel unwanted in that circumstance as well. So consider how you make somebody feel if you behave in that non-caring manner as well. You know what the old people say, do so, don't like so.
Yes.
Right. Remember that, because it is true. What you don't like for other people, for yourself, you can't like for other people. So that's something that we're indicating to you as well. All right. So we're talking about the being and now the doing. The doing part of it is we need to act on those things that we talk about. So you must act in a socially responsible way, consistently and congruently as a participant in a community and on your commitments and passions. Now, that's the doing element. So it's a three-part process: knowing, being, doing. Those are the three parts of the whole the cornerstone of that whole relational leadership model. The knowing, being, doing. Doing here has to be in such a way that you are doing it consistently and congruently. Consistently means that every time a particular issue or particular behavior comes up, you behave in a particular consistent manner. And regardless of what circumstance you find it happening or coming up, you are congruent in your behavior across the board. So you can't be one way in public and one way in private. You have to be consistently and congruently behaving in a particular manner. So that brings us into the concept of social responsibility. Social responsibility is the principle that in addition to pursuing profit generations, corporations should strive to act in a way that positively affects society and the world. Now, this is when we talk about socially responsible, it really refers to, or is likely to refer to, how firms behave. But we also have to think about this from an individual point of view in terms of, if something is not profitable, does it necessarily mean that I should avoid behaving doing that? So the idea is we have to balance what we do for gain as opposed to what we do to help our society outside there, beyond my home, beyond what we take place. So this is where we started to speak about how our behaviors would impact upon the wider community that we live in, the society that we're part of, and the countries that we are part of. So simple things like reducing your carbon footprint, trying to reuse and not generate too much more garbage. Those kind of things become part of your social responsibility. And that's what we're talking about there. As a leader, you need to begin to act in a, well, not begin, but you need to continually act in a socially responsible manner across the board. So not only when you're dealing with the public, you do this, you have to do it in private as well. So basic principles of the leadership development process. Though we identified this three-step thing, leadership is not a simple thing of A, B, C, and then you're a good leader. It don't work so. It cannot be reduced to a number of just easy steps, but it does help us develop a way in which we can begin to approach the whole process of leadership development. It will help us to develop a good philosophy, personal philosophy of leadership, and will identify core values that will help you work towards being a better leader. Now, what are some of those core values that we will talk about? Things like fairness, equity, those are the things that you want to pay attention to, because that's where things go awry. All right. Okay. So in the developmental process, there are a couple of paradigms that we have to adjust to, and Olivia spoke about one of these here. Instead of working harder only, what the theory talks about, or the thing talks about, is working smarter. And when we say working smarter, we mean collectively smarter, reflectively smarter, and spiritually smarter. Now, what does that mean? Collectively smarter is very simple. All of us are smarter than one of us. Right, Olivia? Because you brought that up. All right. If you think about it, when we depend, or we only allow our point of view to govern behaviors, then we are limiting the decision-making process on the information provided by that one individual. But if you have more individuals in the activity, and you allow all individuals to participate in making decisions, you are allowing for the skills, trainings, and experiences of more people to influence the decision, and therefore collectively you will make a better decision. That's why working in groups is important, because together we can come up with more options than just what we can come up with. All right. Reflectively smarter. Taking time to make meaning out of what happened in the past in order to gain perspective and understanding that will influence our decisions in the future. So reflectively smarter really is trying to tell us we need to spend time reflecting on the past in order to make better decisions in the future. Learn from our mistakes, but also learn from your successes as well. All right, those are the things, because we want to be able to repeat that behavior. And therefore, if we're not aware what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, then yes, you're not going to get that running correct. Spiritually smarter refers to being aware of those core values and principles that we hold on to when things get bad, when things get rough. If you want to know what is truly at the core of any individual, observe their behavior, or observe your behavior when things go wrong. That's what they mean by rough, white or rough water. If you really want to know your value structure, evaluate a time frame of behavior that you went through when things were going seriously haywire, when you're under a lot of stress and pressure. Look at what you did. Look at what other people did. And that really speaks to what their principal values are, how virtuous they're going to be, what are their core beliefs. Because when, as they say, the crap hits the fan, it's just those elements that stay put for us. That makes sense? All right, so paradigms. A paradigm is a way in which we do things. It's a methodology that we tend to utilize. And the question I want to ask at this point in time is, what is the current paradigm on leadership? And the current paradigm is necessary for us to look at, because we need to be aware that given the circumstances that are facing us, it is probably signaling to us that there's a need for us to make some sort of change. That's what is referred to as a paradigm shift. So a paradigm shift, it means that we have to change the way in which we do things, or the way in which we view things, because what we were doing in the past is no longer working. And this is a problem, because we can get stuck in methods of doing things in the past that are no longer relevant in the current time frame, current situations. And if we continue trying to use old systems in new circumstances, and we are going to constantly fail, then we kind of get stuck in that rut, sort of like the definition of insanity. You keep on doing the same thing, hoping for a different result. If that's the case, then we're doing something wrong. Okay, so paradigm shifting is something that as individuals we can go from our own personal point of view, paradigm shifting, but collectively you want to look at paradigm shifting for the way in which leadership looks at things as well. That's something that we have to look at. All right. So a paradigm shift that this text wants us to look at, or this model wants to look at, is that leadership is not so much about the leader as it is about the followers. And followers are those individuals within an organization who actually get things done. Now, followership, therefore, is defined here as really leadership amongst the people in the group. So if you're in a fairly large organization, how many of y'all here are parts of some sort of grouping, non-profit oriented business activity, like a member of a Leo club or 4-H committee or community projects or some kind of not-for-profit activity. Any of you all, or maybe a church group or youth group, something along those lines. Any of you all involved in those kind of things? So hopefully in the past, maybe you've been involved with those kind of things. But what you recognize is that regardless of who's at the helm, who is elected or nominated as the leader, you can't get anything done if the followership doesn't go with you. You can't do those things without them. All right. So these are from the text, some follower types: the politician, the partner, the subordinate, the contributor. So on the axes, we're measuring the relational initiative and the performance initiative. So you're either high to low in terms of the ability to develop and sustain positive relationships, and high to low in terms of your performance initiative as an individual. So obviously, somebody who's able to maintain good relationships, positive relationships, and has high levels of performance initiative, they will classify as a partner. Those who are good at the relationships but poor at performance, we refer to them as politicians. They like the networking but not able to actually do anything. The contributor, not very good, or they don't like the relationship element, but they are they're good with the work. That's a contributor. And they have a lot of people like that, right? So if you think about people who don't like to present, they don't like to speak in crowds and that type of stuff, they tend to be able to do a lot of work, but they shy away from getting involved with presenting and stuff like that. That's something that you want to look at. And then of course you have subordinates. They just low on everything. They need a lot more management in terms of how to get them to do what you want them to do. Now I want you to think about these titles here and their relational performance initiatives, and think about who you are in a group. Are you a partner, contributor, politician, or subordinate? Problems with partners is that they challenge leadership. So some people don't like partners because it creates, because they have a lot to contribute and they have a point of view. Strong leaders have a tendency to feel threatened by that, and that can be problematic. Politicians are good because maybe although they're unable to actually put in the work, they're really good at the networking and the performance elements of it. So if you are a leader, you need to understand what are the strengths and weaknesses of the people in your group, and therefore put them to work in the way in which best suits the outcome that you're looking for. Remember, you are working together with people with a particular goal in mind, some objective in mind. Now, another model, this is the Hyacint model here, has another set of this is a different set of follower types, but this one is more related to political activities. So the leader is surrounded by a number of different types of followers: loyalists, sycophants, critics, opportunists, spectators, traitors, and realists. Again, the importance here is to understand the characteristics of these individuals and know that the people fall into those categories, and therefore you need to know how to use those individuals to achieve the goals that you have in mind. Some of this sounds very Machiavellian in nature, because as a leader, you would, you might utilize the greed of a sycophant to manipulate them to get something done for you on the promise that they get something back. Similar with opportunists, who's only looking for opportunities for self-gain. That type of stuff. Those are the things that you want to pay attention to. The idea here is that when it comes to follower types, the leader needs to be aware of or have the ability to categorize, and it doesn't mean that people can't cross borders as well. That's another thing. And be able to understand how to best use them. So what are the responsibilities of followers? Followers have to offer support to the leader. They need to be able to use their initiative. They also have to be able to play counseling and coaching roles, both to each other as followers as well as to the leader. Because sometimes the leader needs people to talk to. Not sometimes. They're always going to need help, coaching and counseling roles. They should raise issues and concerns when necessary. They can't be afraid of a leader and not want to confront them when there's something wrong or something going thing. Seek and encourage honest feedback. So obviously when you're raising issues, you're looking for honesty with the type of things that's going on. You want your role and function in the organization clarified. You should also show appreciation to the leader. You should keep the leader informed about what's taking place, so constant communication, and you should resist inappropriate influences of leaders. This one is a difficult one because a lot of leaders don't like people with this level of critical thinking skills. They prefer to have followers who will do what you say and not question your decisions. Right, Olivia?
So
Sounds to me that sometimes you don't give your followers in your organization the fact that they ought to be able to do these things.
actually, I don't mind a bit of resistance because it kind of sharpens me. I don't like people who just do what I say, because sometimes I really have an issue and I really want a different opinion or a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
I think,
but what you need to do is you need to encourage a constructive way in which that can happen, because a lot of people coming into an organization have a tendency to perceive that behavior is not something that they would encourage. And you need to encourage people to do it and not punish people when they do come to you, those kind of things. That's something you have to be careful with. It's a balance you have to strike. That makes sense?
I get where you're coming from. I think my biggest issue is sometimes I might ask, yeah, that too. Micromanaging.
Control freak.
Yeah. I don't delegate well. Well, that's part of micromanaging. But yeah, I do like listening to opinions, so I don't always take it.
No, you don't have to if you
but I like
value it. But the whole concept is you have to learn to give up control, because you'll end up being limited by what you do, whereas a whole range of other possibilities are there that you're not allowing to happen.
So can I say something? In reading the chapter that we do, I might be a bit ahead.
Oh, that's fine.
I came across an important thing that it said as a leader, sometimes when you're too, I guess, I don't want to use that word, but when you're too when you have a grip and a tight hold on activities and what should be done and how things should be done, that when you're not around, everything falls apart.
Yes, and that's because you're not allowing
Yeah.
the process of empowerment.
Yes.
So you're not
that is my-
empowering your followers to be able to take the responsibility of carrying the organization forward. So visionary leaders know that part of their role is to make sure that they create the capacity within the organization for their for leadership to continue, for the momentum to continue, even in their absence. It's one of the reasons why a lot of businesses fail after the primary leader dies. Right? Because they didn't create succession planning.
Yeah.
You follow? So that's
true.
something that the text actually refers to a lot. All right,
Mhm.
follower competencies. So these are the things that you're looking for when you're, let's say you're hiring followers. Loyalty. Can work well in change-oriented environments. Can function well on teams. Now, if we're asking this for followers, remember that these inadvertently also mean that the leader has to be able to do these same things as well. Huh? So functions well on teams, thinks independently and critically, and considers integrity of a paramount importance. That is critical stuff that you're talking about there. All right, so these are what the followers have to be able to do. Is followers the best terms for this type of individual? Would you suggest something else? Anybody? What would you call somebody that you hire who has these functions and competencies? You see, followers sounds very derogatory. Yes?
Team members.
Team members, right? That's a good term. What about an associate? How about that too? These are my associates, although you are leading the team.
Yeah, I think that kind of,
Yeah?
showing them. I mean, I could look away, kind of,
Yeah, but you're not really showing any hierarchy though, because if you
that's the
go
point.
just but then you need a little bit of hierarchy because then people
Yeah,
could
but
tend to overstep.
no, they will. If you know
No?
what you're doing and how you set up the organization, if you try to level everybody and we're operating as pairs, but you're the team leader, the team lead, then it's but you have to also remember leadership is also something that is the opportunity to lead is part of what you have to give a follower. Because again, you have to prepare other people to take on the functionality of leadership in your absence.
Yeah, but so what we talking about leadership in a group setting, in a sports
Leadership
club, in a business
it doesn't matter. In all circumstances, regardless of where we find leadership taking place, in a social organization, political organization, or in your family, the behaviors of leaders and followers is of the thing is the same. The process should be the same. That's what the theory is telling us. It's more geared towards social change and management, that type of stuff. But the idea is that leadership is a common tool that can be utilized across the board in different fields. All right, that makes sense.
Yes,
all right. So these are some of the what we call followers. We talked about this. These are the way in which people in your organization could eventually begin to feel. So on the x-axis, we're looking at the level of activity in terms of whether or not the person is passive or whether or not they're active. And on the y-axis, we're looking at their degree of independence and critical thinking. So you can see there's a negative values involved in both. All right. So effective followers, we want them in our organization. We want effective followers who are critical thinking and highly active in the organization. Alienated followers, on the other hand, they are critical thinkers, but they are very passive in their behavior, sort of disengaging from the organization. That's something you want to avoid as a leader. You don't want too many yes people. We call them sheeps or sheeple. All right. They're active in the organization, but they depend upon you for all critical thinking activities. All right. And then, of course, we have sheep. They do nothing. They think nothing. They just do. And they will just follow the crowd. Kind of like wherever they go, they will just move along with them, that kind of stuff. Dangerous people. Sheeple. Yes, people and sheeple. Yes, people can be a little more dangerous, but sheeple is passive aggressive kind of thing. You kind of want people more in the middle, but more effective followers. Those are the kinds of followers that you want to have, that you want to encourage into independent critical thinkers who are willing to contribute and work in the organization. All right. 6 types of leadership styles that can be utilized in terms of developing leadership. Classical leadership styles, which is laissez-faire, autocratic, or participative. So we talked about any style being utilized depending upon the circumstances that you find yourself in. So yes, sometimes you kind of leave things alone. That's what they call laissez-faire. Autocratic is high management, especially if you have deadlines to meet and stuff like that. You might need to be more autocratic. Participative, allowing everybody to contribute towards making the decision. That's participative. Situational, that's leadership that emerges based upon the circumstance you find yourself in. Emergent, that really speaks to like succession planning. Transactional and transformational, this is something that that leadership style means that you trade in things. So if you do this and you get it done right, yeah, you get tomorrow off kind of thing, or you get a bonus activity. Transformational leadership is a more involved type of leadership, because here what you're trying to do is you're trying to encourage people and motivate them to want to change, to transform from one type of activity or one type of thinking into another type of thinking. So that requires a lot more psychological work to be able to get that transformational nature going on. And visionary leadership styles, those are leadership styles that are dependent upon painting pictures of a future that everybody wants to be part of. Visionary. Those are some of the strongest leaders, but sometimes they need other type of leadership to get it done, because visionaries are very good at creating the picture, but they may be unable to actually put in an integrity work to get it done. So those are things you have to pay attention to. So different styles of leadership means are required for different circumstances. All right. So who's the leader? Anybody, any person who actively engages with others to accomplish change. That's what the text is telling us a leader is. Their function: motivate employees, attain organizational goals, ensure that rules are being adhered to, and they must also adhere to the rules, provide continuity and momentum. That's an important thing there. We spoke about that in terms of succession planning. Embrace and foster change, similar to the responsibilities of followers. Work for the common good. Be socially responsible. Be civically engaged, and show civic responsibility. So we'll get into those in a little more detail later on. All right, so socially responsible or social responsibility is your commitment to the well-being of people, the community that you work in, and public good. So a lot of us kind of feel in this. We are responsible to our personal lives, but we have a tendency to, negate our contribution or our impact upon the shared community that we have. We have to start to be leaders who are aware of what negative and positive things we do in the world around us, and be part of the solution and not the problem. Civic engagement means that we feel more responsible for what we see happening in our immediate communities, our work community, our social community, our family, and our community that we live around. A simple idea like this would be, if you feel a heightened sense of responsibility, you're not going to go into your job site and just dump a whole set of rubbish on the floor. If you inadvertently, if you throw things on the floor, you'll yourself get up and go and pick it up and put it there. That's the type of social responsibility or civic engagement that we're talking about. So the same thing would be, you don't drive along the roads or walk along the roads and throw your garbage out on the sides of the streets. That is you're not engaging in your community in a healthy way. You're destroying your community, and you're doing negative things that would negatively impact upon the community that you're working with. So these are some actions here that they talk about as being important for civic engagement. Participating in activities such as volunteering and service learning and so on. I've done this in the past. Of course, this comes with the ability to commit these things. Oh, I see somebody coming in here. Ellie. All right. Willingness to make positive contributions to our society. That's our civic commitment. Civic skills, the ability to be involved in civil society, politics, and democracy. So like, how many of you all voted in the last elections? That's part of that whole civic responsibility. Social cohesion, meaning a sense of reciprocity, trust, and bonding with others. So what you do, you are you don't wait for other people to do things. You do it because you know that it benefits everybody, and there's a sense of, if I see somebody do that, then I will do something else and kind of pay it forward, kind of situation like that. Those are the kind of circumstances we want to talk about. Civic responsibility, the sense of personal responsibility individuals should feel to uphold their obligations as part of any community, such as not littering, not speeding, those kind of things. I think I have a list of things, right? So these are some of the civic responsibilities that we talk about. Jury duty, going to school, obeying laws, paying taxes. Participating in community service, voting, serving in the military, and displaying patriotism. Those are things that we can do to display our civic responsibility. All right. Trinidad, we have very strange we're very apathetic when it comes to this. We don't seem to have a lot of pride in our country, at least in a general sense. But when we go abroad, we see Trinidadians be very patriotic. And that's because you're suffering from a degree of isolation and a lack of social identity. So therefore, you're strengthening how you feel and the linkages you have to where you come from. But when we're in our own homes and we live in Trinidad, we seem to have forgotten a lot of those things. All right. Should leaders know everything? No, it's not practical. Leaders require openness to learning, and therefore we have to be one. We shouldn't expect that everybody knows everything. Leader, regard, and follower. So we all have to be part and parcel of an open learning process. All right. And remember that all of us are smarter than just the one of us. So if we go now, everybody in an organization needs to make the environment safe for learning, making mistakes, and sharing knowledge. Some leaders have the perception that not knowing something is a sign of weakness, and therefore they will hide the fact that they're ignorant to it. Two, that if I make a mistake, it's the end of the world, and that whatever information I have is for me and nobody else. Some really old school people like that. So in this model, we are saying, or this model is reporting that the entire organization needs to be open to learning and being in the process of learning, making errors, and sharing the learning that is taking place, sharing the knowledge that's taking place on it. So the learning model that comes from the text has to do with focus, capacity, and will. And the intersection of all three is what you do, what you're focused on, what your capacity is, and what your willingness to do. This reminds me of effective demand. It means that you have to have money and you need to want something to be able to effectively demand it. There are a lot of things that you want to do, but you don't have the money to do, and therefore there's no effectiveness with it. So it's the same kind of thing there. In order for you to be able to do something, your focus, capacity, and your willingness have to coincide. So think about any new skill, like somebody was saying that they speak Korean. I think it was Miss Smith. She obviously had to get to the point where her focus, capacity, and willingness coincided to be able to read that. So that's one learning model. This is another learning model here, where we apply, well, we pick up, conceptualize knowledge, apply it, learn from the experience of applying it, reflect, and go through the process again. This is what we call critical inquiry. Now, this is part of the scientific methodology. For those of you who do sciences, you would understand that this is a process that usually develops theories, and those theories are then applied in the real world around us. So that's part of the learning process that the learning model that we've copied from the scientific approach to doing things. That makes sense? So the most effective organizations in the world are those that are learning environments in which learning is ongoing, constant, pervasive, and valued, lifelong learners. So like COSTAT itself is a situation where it's a community that encourages lifelong learning throughout its activities and throughout the entire thing. And one of the ways in which we learn, the most effective way, is what is referred to as experiential learning, learning from doing. So the model that we get with that is this. We conceptualize on something, we actively experiment with it, we take that concrete experience, reflect and make observations, and then conceptualize again. So the idea is this. For a lot of us, for the vast majority of individuals, learning has to be something that we develop through our experience. And the most powerful learning takes place in developing the doing element. So you do things over and over and you learn best. So at the end of the day, what we're speaking about here with the model is that regardless of how we end up with in any of the learning processes, we have to understand that we are going to have to make sure that as a leader, we encourage learning and learning at all levels, including yourself. All right. So leadership is a role open to anybody. Leadership is living by a personal set of rules in which you motivate others to do the right thing, to be engaged in the world, and to listen to others and their concerns. Leadership is focused on the other person. And that's the most critical takeaway from this model. The relational leadership model focuses on the relationship you have with everybody else. And I'd like to close off by saying leadership is not the privilege of the few. You and I can be and should be leaders. So that brings the PowerPoint to an end. But any questions you have that you want to get clarification? Anybody? Yes, Williams. Or Chad, whoever wants to take the mic. Just open your mic and ask.
to lead you to do wrong?
Sorry?
Isn't it possible for a leader to lead you to do wrong?
We'll get into that, yes, but yes, there have been examples of leaders leading people in the wrong way. Yeah, we've had that. There have been
Right.
lots of circumstances where you've had leadership like that.
So I have a question for you, sir.
Yeah. Go ahead.
What leader you find is a good leader, like in terms of history or in politics or in just in general? A leader
leaders I liked that
Yeah.
appealed to me. That in the past I liked JFK for parts of his life. That's John F. Kennedy. Obama came up pretty good at one point in time from an international forum. Mandela impressed me. Mahatma Gandhi impressed me from a historical point of view. Locally, there was a politician called, was it Dennis Panton? But it was one of the Panton brothers. I think he died. Not Dennis Panton, but he was a minister. And at a point in time, he resigned from the party and from the ministry because he felt that it wasn't getting a good job done. And I respected somebody who withdrew himself from a circumstance where he felt he was doing more damage than good. That was another person that I felt was a good guy. And there was a guy I met once. He actually went to jail. He had trained as a medical a doctor, and he also was a qualified accountant. He did the ACCA, and he got into trouble, and he ended up in jail as a doctor. And when he came out of jail, of course, he couldn't practice medicine anymore. He started to get involved in social activities to support. Any of you all know the Field Foundation? Ever heard of that?
No, sir.
Foundation for the Enlightenment and Enrichment of Life. It's actually run by the same minister who I spoke about. He was a minister of education and he resigned. It was one of the Panton brothers. I can't remember which one. I always keep on saying Dennis and Anthony, but Anthony was the Archbishop. Dennis Panton was a lecturer. Anyway, so the activity was the guy who he very quietly came to the Field Foundation and asked to volunteer his time to after he finished his prison sentence. So obviously he couldn't practice as an accountant or as a doctor anymore because having gone through that period of incarceration, he lost his license and he lost his ability to act. And he came into that organization and started to give of his time to try and build to recoup. I think what he had done, he had done some fraud with hiding money and stuff, and got caught or something. I can't remember what he did, but I remember that guy impressed me because in field organization he was able to rise to a level of taking leadership, but in a social environment where instead of him doing it for personal gain, he was doing it to enrich other people's lives. That guy impressed me in terms of somebody who did the absolutely wrong things and then tried to find his way back into life, kind of thing, on the right path. that showed a lot of strength of character, I felt. Other than that, I don't know. Who your heroes? Your leaders that impress. Anybody? Nicholas, Malcolm X, right? Yeah. Okay, cool.
I don't have like a leader. I just have like certain qualities in different leaders.
Yeah, that's
So
fine.
one of them would be Eric Williams would be one.
What aspect? Because there were many aspects to his leadership.
Okay, I would say he had a former, because in those times, colonial times, they didn't really need to come back to Trinidad. They could have just emigrate. So a form of loyalty, like leaders who loyal to the group.
Yeah. You know,
And
he
sell
came
out.
back with it wasn't only him, it was him and a couple of his couple of guys from Trinidad who went abroad and studied, and they were determined to come back and get Trinidad independence and move. But it wasn't only Trinidad, it was Trinidad, Barbados, Jamaica. It was a whole host of them, because back in the day, the scholarship winners would meet up in England when they went to study, and they were able to get together and they designed these ideas and stuff that they wanted to come back and think. And him being a student of history, Dr. Eric Williams, you ever read his books?
Yeah, I read his book. Yeah.
Which one?
I read Capitalism and Slavery.
Slavery
and
to
I read
Capitalism. Yeah. Is it
and I
that
read
one? And also, there's another one that he wrote about the economics of the slave trade. And in that document, in that writing, he was able to break down the economies and how the slave trade was used to create a lot of problems that we inherited in Trinidad and Tobago. That level of dependency and that was created through the colonialist movements, and those challenges were very difficult, and that was something that frustrated him, because he could clearly see, you know, a lot of the things that we didn't at the time. I guess we didn't want to see or simply couldn't see. But he clearly saw the level of dependency that was created by England on their economy. So him trying to get us to break away and stuff like that, be independent, was something that he always wanted. But he was real frustrated. He's like Olivia a little bit. If you didn't agree with him, he had serious problems with you. And that was the problem he faced, because he was miles ahead of other people in terms of his intellect and his ability to foresee what is likely to come in the future. He had little patience for people who were short-sighted and myopic in their view, and really, and that created a problem.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So,
you read his memoir. Yes, Olivia.
I'm not that bad, eh?
Yeah.
Thing,
no, you're not as bad.
Yeah.
You're not. Because
let me explain myself.
No, what I'm going to say is I'm going to clarify. He was so bad that he had people from Trinidad and Tobago exiled, because of that situation. I don't know if you all heard about it. Owen R. Robinson was one that he had removed. Didn't remove, he kind of like couldn't hold any political office afterwards. C.R.L. James was another one he had problems with. Anybody who challenged his authority and didn't have the shared vision that he had no patience with them.
Well,
right.
maybe I am like that. No, well, yes, well.
But at least what you don't have probably is the political power to
exile people.
to punish people the way he was able to. But no, I mean he had a vision for where he wanted to see Trinidad go, And one of the problems we didn't do and he didn't do was plan for his demise. And that succession planning was problems, because even to this day, there is no succession planning in political parties. The only person who really stepped down from a political party was Andy. He gave up the thing and left it to the other people. But I mean, it's really a ridiculous. People who want to hold on to power can become, you know, despots that are problematic over time. Anyway, anybody else have think about who your favorite leaders might be? Olivia, who are some of yours?
So favorite leaders?
Yeah, well, people who you impressed you.
I don't really have. That's sad, eh? But
yeah, I have a problem. I have very poor views of current leadership around us today in all political spheres. In the entertainment industry, I have very little patience with some of the nonsense that I see going on there. I don't know. I'm alienated. Let me put it that way. I fall into that.
I think
Michelle Obama, Melinda. All right, I could see that.
So I think I have favorite leaders, but not leaders of people, more like leaders of self. That's
like
what
who,
I
like
think.
who?
Like I really like I don't know if you know him, Dr. Joe Dispenza. I like people that more in the transformational side of leadership, but I would say more. I don't think they really push an agenda to lead people to get them to do what they want. It's more like
they fall into the category of more motivational speakers.
Yeah.
Who are engaging people to be able to do self-help, which is sort of like where this work comes from. It comes from that background to try and say, okay, these are the things you need to do to be able to become better as a leader. So the design of this course is based along that, except you don't have to pay for it.
I like Sadhguru. I don't know if you know who Sadhguru is.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, he was in Trinidad probably. What year they got it?
A couple of years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was hosted here by, I think, the NCIC. Came and did some stuff. Anyway, guys, it's just coming up after 8. Let me, I know we go until, so if we're not going to discuss anything more critical, let me stop the recording. So that, all right.